Today we are harvesting the rest of our sweet potatoes. Make sure to stick around to the end where I share the 3 major lessons that we learned about growing sweet potatoes this year. And then also I would love it if you would hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it to your other friends who are learning how to garden, and just give them a little bit of a heads up on one of the easiest plants to grow. So this year we tried a new experiment with our sweet potatoes. In the past, I have always just planted them in one box in particular, and I usually trellis them because the vines get really intense. They take up a whole box, and I can't always grow anything else in there if I leave the vines down just to kind of like vine all over the box. So our sweet potato starts went crazy this year, and I was so excited. I had started a few in jars of water like I always do, and then I saw a really cool tip where you actually just plant a sweet potato in the ground about halfway, kind of like you would do to start it in water. And you can actually, I think you do it in a pot. I did mine in pots. And from that, it cues the sweet potato to make sweet potato slips, which are the little vine starts that you break off, root, and then plant into your dirt to get your next batch of sweet potatoes. So I tried that, and they went crazy. I got so many sweet potato slips, so much more than even starting them in a jar of water. So I just kept planting sweet potato slips. I just kept going and kept going and kept going until I ran out of room. So this box here we've already harvested, and it had a trellis on either side with vines going up it, kind of like you can see here. We did the same thing in this box, and that's the first year we've ever done a second box of sweet potatoes. And I kind of staggered my planting. Just as I got slips, I stuck them in a space. And so this would have been the first box we planted. This was the second box we planted. And then this was the third box we planted as my cucumbers and stuff died out. I started planting sweet potatoes in here. This we will harvest in just a little bit. And then I even ended up sticking some in this box with our strawberries because it was deeper dirt and it was looser dirt. I just harvested these, and I will say they are a little bit smaller, but that is only because I had to go ahead and harvest them. We had a couple of frosts over the weekend, and so that damaged the vine, so I have to go ahead and pull them. But most of them, I mean, they were still the size of my hand, or about half the size of my hand. And so I was really happy. They were still a good size. It just might take a few more to make a meal. So I still had sweet potato slips coming, and while I could have gone ahead and just gotten rid of them, if you've met me, you know I like to maximize every square inch of my garden. So here I planted the last of the slips. They got put in very late as far as like sweet potato planting would I guess be on the calendar. However, I had these deeper rows of dirt, and I wasn't going to waste it and leave them blank. So we're going to harvest these in a minute, but I'm really excited to share the results of this experiment, as well as just kind of sum up what we've learned from growing sweet potatoes this year. Okay, so a few important lessons that I learned about sweet potatoes this year. First of all, it appears that, at least in our area in Georgia, planting a little bit later than typically you would plant is not detrimental to your crop. So I typically plant our sweet potato starts when it is warm enough to start planting. We're past our last frost for the year, because frost damages the sweet potato leaves and vines. And without a leaf and a vine, your sweet potato itself is generally not going to fare well. However, what I found this year was, when we were harvesting that first box of sweet potatoes, those actually had the most damage on them out of the entire crop. So I had more sweet potatoes that were split, which just is a sign of having too much water. But I had just been watering in the times of drought, and then we got a whole bunch of rain. So honestly, planting those early, or I guess technically what would be considered on time, is not a bad thing. But for me, that means I'm going to have to adjust my harvest times. And I'm really going to have to start tracking when I put things in so that I know when to harvest them. I have always read that you harvest your sweet potatoes when the vines start to die back. And although this year that happened kind of all in one fell swoop because we had that frost, overall that normally doesn't happen for us. Usually what happens is the vines start to yellow and kind of wither, and that's when I know that sweet potatoes are ready to be harvested. So what I found this year by staggering my planting was that the sweet potatoes that I planted later, although some of them were smaller, we still had quite a few really big ones. I had less splitting overall, and they just are looking like they're going to store better. So lesson number one is, you do have some wiggle room when planting sweet potatoes. They apparently are not a crop that needs like a whole ton of time. They don't need the whole summer to mature. You can plant them later. The ones that we planted in the ground, honestly, I think those got planted in either mid-July, maybe late July, early August. But they still did really well, and they had clay to contend with. So that brings me to my second point, which would be the quality of your dirt is actually going to be more important than the time that you plant your sweet potatoes. So you're not going to be able to plant a sweet potato vine and in 2 weeks have a full-grown potato. However, the dirt that's in my raised beds, that dirt has been curated over years. The dirt that is in the 2 wooden raised beds that you saw at the beginning of the video, those beds are almost 10 years old, maybe even 12 years old. And so that dirt has been in there and has been added, had compost added to it, and, organic material and stuff like that. So that dirt is prime dirt. The dirt over in the cement block bed, that bed is newer, so is that dirt, but it has had compost added into it. And again, those sweet potatoes that we got out of that bed were great. Some of them averaged on the smaller side, but we still got some really big ones out of there, and they were easy to move out. Now, the dirt that, of course, is out in the garden beds, in the in-ground rows that we're growing on, those rows are all new. We added those last year. They have been amended, and we've added compost and potting soil and manure and stuff to it, but I'm still contending with a lot of clay because that's just what our soil is here. So the fact that I even got anything out of those rows that was of usable size, plus the late planting, I'm really excited. But what I'm most excited about actually is the fact that in some of those raised beds, especially like the one by the chicken coop, those slips were planted very, very late. Again, by like planting standards, and those potatoes did really well. So that tells me that the quality of my dirt in those boxes was good enough to grow a quality potato even with a shortened time span. The last lesson that I think I learned this year is essentially that I am not doing anything wrong by trellising my sweet potatoes. And I'll tell you a little bit what I mean by that, because a lot of vining plants, when they root down, and they'll root down as the vine gets longer, because that's just like a built-in support system that the plant does, so that if it were to get damaged somewhere along an extremely long vine, the rest of the vine can continue to grow. Pumpkins do that. There's quite a few plants that do that. But I have read mixed things talking about sweet potatoes, and if you allow those vines to actually crawl along the ground, they will create another potato like every place that the vine roots down. So that was part of my experiment with planting those potatoes in the ground back in the garden, because I really wanted to see if I was missing out on a bounty of sweet potatoes by trellising the ones that were in the raised beds. Ultimately, what I found out was this. I possibly would have gotten a small sweet potato every place that the vines on the ground rooted down. Some of the vines that we pulled, some of the roots did look like they were starting to form a smaller sweet potato. However, overall, my biggest harvest still came from that core root in the vine that I originally planted. And nothing that we pulled up from the in-ground sweet potatoes, nothing was enough to really amount to what would have been a worth it sweet potato for me. And so for me, that was just very reassuring in the fact that I know I'm not losing out on this huge harvest by trellising my sweet potatoes. In fact, I'm honestly probably maximizing my space better. And so I will continue to trellis my sweet potatoes. The way we are going to have to rotate our plants this year, especially our tomatoes, I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to work all of that in to the garden space. So that will be probably like a spring and summer video when I show you guys how I'm going to move everything around. It's time for a rotation in the garden, but I honestly just haven't wrapped my head around how I'm going to completely do it yet. But I do feel very confident knowing that even if I have to move the sweet potatoes out of the boxes, and put tomatoes in the boxes or whatever, like I said, I'm not 100% sure yet. But at least I do know that, one, they will be okay in the ground, but two, I do not need to let them go all willy-nilly all over the garden. I could put them in deep rows, I could trellis those rows, and I do not have to waste any space allowing vines to go all over the garden. So, some very important lessons, and also very helpful if you are trying to grow sweet potatoes in a small space, because the vines do get obnoxious. In fact, I find that most vining plants are sort of obnoxious. And honestly, if we didn't like the produce that comes from them, I probably would never plant a vining plant just because they take up so much space. However, we love sweet potatoes, and they're a really great food to have for like prepping and stuff like that. I mean, they're sweet, they're savory, there's just so many uses. So this year has been a great success as far as our sweet potatoes go. Tomatoes, massive fail. Few other things, massive fail. But when it comes to cucumbers and sweet potatoes, I'm going to call this year a success. I hope you guys were able to learn some things in this video, and I really hope this encourages you to try sweet potatoes. I know I've talked about this in other videos, but honestly, to me, they're one of the truly easiest garden plants to grow. You could grow them in pots, on a deck, on an apartment I can't think what it's called, porch, deck, whatever, little, the little thing on the apartments. The vines are gorgeous. They could hang over your porch railing if you live in an apartment, and they're very decorative, but they're just a great plant, and the product of them is just so nutritious. So I'm going to go to bed because the rest of my family is in bed, and I wanted to finish this up so that I could share it with you guys, because I was actually really excited. This was like a good thing for our garden. And so we'll talk to you guys soon.